I think that's nice. Sounds like kind of.
Yeah.
6 o'clock.
Yeah.
All right, it is 6 o'clock, so I would like to call this special meeting of the Kent Board of Selectmen to order. October 18th, 2018 at 6 p.m. and ask that everyone stand and join us in the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As always, I would remind everybody that our meetings are streamed live on YouTube. The camera's over here. All the camera will see is up here. So if you speak loudly, but you won't be on camera. That's a consolation. We have a one-item agenda today, a big item. Discussion and possible action on the management review report. There are extra copies of the management review report, not including job descriptions, up here on the table if anybody needs a copy. And I guess the big question before us to start with is how to start. Jeff made a suggestion, which I think has some merit. Wondering whether it might be wise to ask each department head, and we have quite a few here today. It is worth noting that 2 department heads are on vacation this week, so they are not here. I'm sure they would be otherwise. To ask each department head to briefly, 5 minutes, comment on the report, to include the following points: general comments on the study, specific comments on their department, and do they think that the review was worthwhile. We could do the same, since we are part of the review as well. Jeff also said he has a few specific comments and points to raise. We'd like to hear from other departments first. I thought that was interesting.
That was my take on it.
Yeah. Chris, I don't know what your thoughts are on it.
I think the whole concept here is to have an open discussion to try to.
I don't think we have to, nor do we need to rush into anything and make decisions.
Well, the only thing that we're running up against, as always, is budget time.
Yeah.
So we are getting out ahead of it.
All right.
And I hope that we can take that into
And
consideration.
we don't want to be making a decision in mid-January, but nor do we need to make a decision tonight. So.
Agreed.
So with that in mind, is there anyone that would like to speak to those points, or any related to the review, for starters?
Surely someone had a comment or
Why
thought.
don't you start as selectman?
Well, we thought it'd be appropriate to hear from the department heads first.
I've heard from some via email per a request that I sent out. I've heard from the treasurer concerning job description, and my inclination would be to stay away from job descriptions specifically tonight, not to avoid them or put them aside or make them less important.
Well, I think if any department head thinks that that's a particularly important issue, we can flag that for further focus.
Yeah, but the treasurer did comment on her job description and one concern that I don't think will be too hard to take care of. I did also receive in writing, because he could not be here tonight, comments on job description from the fire marshal. I also have written comment from road foreman Rick Osborne, which is not about the job description, so that's the only one that isn't. So again, anyone want to?
Well, let me break the ice by asking a question. On the page listing the job descriptions, I guess I was a little unclear on 2 of them. The clerk board of finance. What is the relationship to a town hall employee and the board of finance?
The board of finance's clerk, who is Leslie Ferris, who's also the park and rec director. She became the board of finance clerk a couple of years ago. Leslie, what did you say?
Okay, so just to clarify for my purpose, that's a town hall function, and it's just a liaison to the,
Well, her primary job is to take the minutes at all Board of Finance meetings.
okay.
Her major part of her job is to compile the town's annual report, which
So
is a Board of
That's
Finance
unrelated
function.
to anything in the treasurer's office?
Correct.
Okay.
She has little, if
Takes
anything to do.
Other than attending the meeting here, the other work is, the majority of it's done outside of here.
She files the minutes,
Agenda.
the agendas, and so basically the
Legal notice.
clerical
Okay.
work of the Board of Finance. And you got another one?
Well, it's a similar thing, clerk for the ZBA, and that's a similar arrangement.
I would assume it would be a similar arrangement, yeah.
Okay.
I just have a very general, to
Okay.
start. When Mr. Lee was first here, I asked him if he would consider total compensation, and he replied that he would. Now, when I asked him that question when he came the second time, he replied that he would not. Are you all, do you remember him saying any of that?
I remember the second part,
Yeah.
yes, for
Okay,
sure, I was here.
I actually have minutes from your Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen meeting, that I would be happy to have you read if you want, where he did say that he would, right in the minutes. So in other words, the man wasn't following through on what he originally said he was going to do. It's in writing. Just to start the conversation.
Well, I know that's been a big, for lack of a better term, I'll say bone of contention for you for
Definitely.
a number of years.
And I did not like the fact that he denied it the second meeting.
Well, there are a couple of things that, let's back up. I think the approach we were trying to take was to get an understanding of, one, how to deal with the assistance and the leveling out of assistance. That was one.
That's what prompted
That was
this
one
whole thing.
goal.
Yeah.
The other component was the challenge that we face on an annual budgetary basis of trying to provide fair compensation for everyone, you know, that we have to budget for. And then further was to see if in these departments there was continuity, if there was process, there was redundancy, and I think that was also one of the goals. I was a little troubled in some of the components. I thought the clarification of the clerk and assistant was very helpful, at least for me. One. Two, I'm not really comfortable and confident as to the merits in which they are recommending that we use as a process of divining, if you will, whether someone gets a raise or how they get a raise. I didn't see, it wasn't clear to me on that. And then thirdly, on the departments, I didn't really get, I mean, it seemed like everything was working fine. People weren't super stressed, but people weren't, you know, they weren't overworked or underworked. It seemed to be pretty good condition.
That was, I think, stated, so not in those words, but something.
That's how I read it.
Yeah.
I found some specific problems, and I think Rick pointed out with the definition of some workers being unskilled. I thought that was not a fair assessment. I found the gender question that they brought out as odd, because it didn't really take into consideration the process in which I think we got there with respect to, you know, the inequities, if you will, of one position over the other, specifically I think it's the assessor's office and the gender roles. I take issue with that in particular. What does jump out at me, and I sort of sensed this from the beginning, it's noted at the top of page 6 in terms of his strong recommendation. It says their recommendation paraphrasing, that part of the budgetary process that each department head meet with the first selectman and board of selectmen and treasurer and present requests and additional hours and resources, and any such requests be in writing specific. And then he goes on to, what I pulled out of this is really the lack of the board of selectmen being involved intimately with the departments. I think that's probably one of the main reasons why we haven't been able to truly understand what and where and how they do. I've been in almost all the departments in town. I know you have, Bruce, Jeff probably some, maybe all. But I don't know if we're going to try to get a measuring stick of how and what somebody deserves, if you will, or earns. I think we, the Board of Selectmen, need to be able to provide goals. I think we need to set some sort of expectation level, and not an overbearing expectation level, but an expectation level of what is going to be produced out of that department. And then somehow have a means, without being heavy-handed, you know, allowing them to do their work, but being able to understand whether that's actually those goals are being achieved. I think you mentioned when we brought this up the other day that we just started a whole lot more work for ourselves. And I think that that's really what we have to do. We have to do a little bit more work for ourselves. And I think I don't know how to achieve that other than to sit down earlier with each of the departments possibly and trying to work out what their goals are, what their needs are. And I think that, to me, if you ask me whether this was worth it or not, the reflection on the Board of Selectmen as a board and functioning, I think it's pretty clear that we need to step up our game in order to help all the other departments step up their games.
I think we have begun discussing a strategy for regular meetings with departments, you know, outside specifically of this management review. So that's kind of part and parcel to where we're going. I was rather perplexed by the report's reference to gender. It just seemed like it was gratuitous, almost like it's a timely subject.
Yeah.
And it just didn't seem to apply reasonably in the situations that he raised it, but that was his take on it.
I didn't think so either. Rick brings that up in his communication to us.
Chris, when you're talking about goals and expectations, are those gonna be, would those be specific to department, are you thinking? As opposed to, I don't know,
I think they would
we're all
have,
gonna come to work on time,
I think
just
they would
for-
have to be with the understanding that some of them would probably be the same across most, if not all, departments, but I would think that some would be specific to a department, wouldn't you? Perhaps not all, but some.
Yeah, I mean, I start with the premise that we're doing a good job here. We're all doing a good job here. The question is really, how do we measure the job that we're all doing, even here, and how do we explain it to the taxpayer? And when we do that, we need to have some measurements. And by that, I think those goals are set by sitting down with the department and saying, what are your goals? And then I believe it's the Board of Selectmen's job to have a overarching goal and make sure those goals are all working together.
Hey,
I would think that most of those goals would be, from a financial standpoint, set up in the capital plan over a 5-year period. Many of the goals that are established in the department I work in are required or affected by the state statutes and statutory changes and reevaluation cycles. I personally have always had specific goals that I've set, whether it be here or any place that I've been affiliated with, so that they have to fit in with those specific cycles and those specific costs, and you have to allow for the training and all the other things that go along with it in between the cycles. I did that with the reevaluation to get that process in place so that would be implemented going forward for cost-saving measures for the town and the taxpayers. It was not an easy process to implement. When you work under statutes, as most of us do, but mine, I think, are more regulated by statute than most, and they change more frequently, and they affect the taxpayers more directly. The training and the changes is more significant and more necessary than most other departments. It truly is. And it's statutorily required. It's somewhere more like it's more technical in some ways, and it's can hurt the town more dramatically in others if the process is not implemented properly. I have been asking for raises for one of the folks that shares the position of the assistant in the office for many years. And when people, whether they be assistants in my office or any other office, but part-time folks, are hurt financially significantly as the time goes on and these across-the-board percentages are given, it becomes a wide gap, and it becomes thousands of dollars a year out of one's pocket, and that's just not right. There are a number of things. The tone of this report, I was so shocked that it was very union-esque, for lack of a better term. I don't know what to call it. It had a lot of union-type phrases in it. I've never been involved in a union, but it stuck out to me like, what? What are we talking about here? I had a problem with that, a big problem with that. That's all I have to say.
Can you give one example? I don't mean to push up one, just out of curiosity, one example of such union-esque phrasing? I don't dispute it. I'm curious as to what you.
It's, I probably could, it would take me a minute to find it, but there's several different references to, we are not Bridgeport, we're not Norwalk, we're not Stamford. There's a bunch of us that get together who care about what we do and try to do a job for a community.
And that's to some extent what we saw in many of the job descriptions. There seemed to be a lot of use of one person referred to it as boilerplate terminology.
Crawling. Crawling.
That was being used to describe some of your jobs.
I was offended by it, frankly.
Yeah.
Well, I get it, but here's the challenge that we face. We're not a small town anymore where you get a bunch of people and you go put out a fire. We're not a small town anymore where you get a bunch of people and you build a road or a bridge. We have statutory regulations, as you know and we all know. We have obligations what jumped out at me is that we have a foreman who's been doing work that shouldn't be doing against labor laws. Now, those are the kind of things that we can say here in town hall, okay, let's just do it this way, no problem, hey, take care of it this way. But one, there's a taxpayer out there who might not appreciate the old way things used to go, and this board has to explain it through budgetary process to the taxpayer. And if people want to be recompensed for the good work and efforts that we know, we have to have that documented, understood, be able to verbalize it and back it up. So each department here can be backed up by the three of us. And if the three of us have a question or a concern with a department, that should be on the table as well, so that we can achieve those goals and be able to do them. I think that we need to conform somewhat with the outside world to that order.
Well, I think, and I can only speak for myself, the way the people I work with in the department, we're fairly current, if not, we were ahead of the game pretty much and still are in some areas. And I say, it's that 5-year capital plan that sort of drives it in the 5-year reval cycle. And having qualified people to help, you just can't bring someone in playing around with computer systems that run your tax base, that pay the bills.
Oh, can I throw, get a show of hands who thought this exercise was a waste of time and money?
You can say the whole audience raised their hand.
Ask her
Yes and
again.
no.
And who thinks it has some merit?
I'll say so.
Somewhere in the middle.
I was not a big proponent of it in the first place.
What did you learn from it that we didn't tell you already? We told you about assistants, we told you about clerks, you didn't listen. You had to have an outsider come and tell you.
I learned, Debbie,
Yes?
that the jobs hours that you posted are not,
I'm asking about the assistants and the clerks.
I'm just telling you, you asked me specifically.
Okay.
I'm telling you, what I found out as well, at least
Where-
my
where-
understanding is that the Board of Selectmen has not had hands-on approach
No.
and goal setting for each department.
Hold on one moment. Job hours that I posted, where did I post these hours that you're referring to? On my door?
In reading this,
Yeah?
there is a discrepancy.
But where is the discrepancy? I think he made it up.
Well,
Where is it?
he may have, but that is a crystal clear,
That
hold on a second.
exemplifies the
That is a
report's
perfect
wrong.
example of you and us not communicating.
I have a posted hour on my door.
But if somebody has a.
Where did he get this number that you're referring to?
I
I don't know either. So don't blame me because my posted hour's on the
I
door.
haven't blamed you. What I simply said is it's enlightening to understand it. And to understand it without having communication with your department,
But
we wouldn't have been able to just say, oh,
Wait a minute.
this is frivolous.
that's like saying you don't feed your dog. You know, I never posted those hours that are incorrect.
Okay, well, I'll move on. I think that, for me, why it was productive is it's clear that the lack of communication, the lack of discussion between departments and between this board, I think, this justifies the fact that I believe personally that we should sit down with each department in particular, get to know them more intimately. And I'll be the first one to say, look, I've been in your office, Patty, for 30 years. And we've had long discussions, and even still, the knowledge that her office has, we don't understand well enough to be able to stand up and say, this is why we need to move this department ahead, or keep it the same, or do something with it. That's where I think this was productive. I think unfortunately, to a degree, and correct me if I'm wrong, but each department is looking at it from their own angle of what they need and what they expect and what they should feel, possibly rightly so, they should be compensated for. That's not the role of this board. This board has to look, I think, at a bigger, more global picture.
There's a couple of other reasons why I think this was helpful. Specifically, we wrestled with the assistant clerk terminology and different varying positions. And we could have continued to grind through that through a few more cycles with a certain degree of satisfaction, a certain degree of unsatisfaction. But this was an outside viewpoint of somebody coming in and tell us where we need to focus. So it's a basis for analysis of adjustments that can be made rationally based on an outside professional's opinion based on some history. There were a couple of other interesting points. One was the issue of the foreman and overtime. That was a discrete point that we've wrestled with in the past. Now we have some, I would say in this case, professional insights into where there may be some issues there and possible ways around it. He did address the training and certification conundrum, I'll say, that we've dealt with also in the past. So I think this document gives us the ability to step back and say, okay, you know, here's some things we can look at, and it's not just the three of us or whoever happens to be sitting up here with no particular expertise good judgment, I hope, but no expertise. And we got a little bit of a frame of reference, say, let's see how this works. So this didn't, you know, for $5,000, we're not gonna get answers on how to restructure the town hall and make this a perfect operation, but it gives us the framework for making some better decisions.
Just to add on to the first piece of your comment about the clerks and assistants, and I think many, if not all, the people are sitting out there saying, but we told you all this, we've told you all this for 2 or 3 or more years, and you are correct. But for me, it was useful to have an independent opinion with a completely unbiased set of eyes looking at it and expressing his opinion. I found that the most valuable piece of this, and I think that topic was what caused this project to begin anyway. So yeah, just to reiterate, yes, you have told us most of what he tells us in here, but this sort of reinforces. So, if anything, most of you should be, I would assume, happy about that part of this report.
There are a significant number of errors in it, significant errors.
We'd love to know that. A few have been pointed out already, but if you have some, please.
Did you go through the chart? Did you, I brought this to your attention yesterday.
You did, and I reached out to Lee, and I think he responded immediately via email. Amidst all these papers, probably, but he did respond, which I'd be happy to share with y'all directly with him. His response basically said he used the salary survey that was given to him from COG, assumed it was correct, and that's what he used, and he feels based on those numbers they are correct. Happy to talk with you further, put him in touch with you.
Well, it's not, again, this is not about Lee Palmer satisfying my questions. My bringing this to your attention was to make sure that if this document is going to be utilized for any decision-making or making process better or improved, I think that when you have a document that has discrepancies in it or errors in it, I would hope that one of the things that you'd want to do first is correct those, because that information and or whether it be information and or numbers, I can't imagine that that's not going to guide you to possibly part of your process.
Yeah, you're referring
What
primarily
is
to
the
these.
errors?
You're referring primarily to these last 2 pages?
So we have,
Lee and I have no salaries on this one page.
That's because I question about that as well.
well, we're lumped in as a
You're in
grade.
a class
You're
there.
Oh, so
I asked about that.
grade level 4, where it notes all the assistants, if you read on page 1, where it shows what the assistant positions ranges should be, here's an example.
Okay.
They should be 2193, 2550, 2907 in his write-up. On the chart, they are not stated as such.
Okay.
Another example which I referred to was, I'm not sure and not clear why in grade level 4, all 4 different positions, their current rates are shown. Why would not be the same rates in grade level 3? Why would you not need that information for each of those positions? I think that, again, we brought this up in part of the conversation when Lee was here, was that, and I'll just state it again, not knowing which towns were used, but having him say that the same towns weren't used for this. So grade level 8, tax collector, town clerk, he verified and stated that the same towns weren't used. How can those figures then be used in the same grade level?
So can I go back for a second? I don't know if you are, Bruce, inclined, and Jeff either. I'm not inclined to change salary levels right now. I think
Tonight, no.
No. Even I mean, I'm using what we currently pay as a means of the base, if you will.
Right.
We do have an issue with, that's probably the top one, is whether we compensate assistants differently and clerks, and I think that can be sorted out. But I'm not inclined to use some chart that just says, okay, well, this is what they said, and so then we're gonna plug that in.
No,
I'm not inclined to do that, even if budgets were tomorrow. So I wanna try to answer that question, Darlene. I don't take this as gospel, right or wrong. I think Bruce is right. If you can tell us what you think are discrepancies and things, that's wonderful. But you know, I'm not looking at these figures and saying, okay, tomorrow we're moving the tax collector or the tax assessor or the park and rec or whomever we pick at that level and then moving them up, mid-entry or higher.
No,
I don't see that.
I don't really think that's what Darlene is trying to say. I think she's really trying to say that there are errors in this chart as well as errors, some of which are reflected incorrectly, chart versus review. And is that indicative of the report in general? That's not the only thing you're saying.
I think
Well,
it's, go ahead, I'm sorry.
You even look on page 3, he had two numbers to add up, 37,000 and 19,000, and he added them incorrectly. Come on, he didn't even prove this. You're gonna pass in a high school report, you should prove it.
So 37 and 19 add up to 54,998. You're saying that's incorrect?
Well, add them. I mean, I have shown you 3 mistakes so far. You want to keep going? Come on, he didn't even prove it. So how can you, if he's so lackadaisical not to prove something he's going to pass in for money, I have a little trouble really believing it. If he didn't care enough to do that, that's my point.
Well, any other glowing comments?
Sure, so I'll speak for myself. Where are you going from here, I guess would be my question. Now that you have this report, what's your next step gonna be, do you think?
There's a couple of issues that it leads to clarification on. I mentioned one was clarifying training and certification. I think the town crew issue needs to be clarified. So it's something we will work on going forward. I would hope we can, in the next budget cycle for the next fiscal year, come up with a clear and reasonably acceptable set of guidelines for the clerks and assistants conundrum. But I think we have the basis here and what we've gotten from all folks enough to make some adjustments. But I mean, we're not tomorrow going to restructure town hall.
A simplistic way of handling it. I've done budgets for over 100 times. I've worked in multiple towns. Never have I seen a situation that has gotten so cloudy when it could be so simple. If you have your department heads and your people who work in the offices, do a proper just study of units of comparison that comply to other towns that are size, maybe population. In my area, the population is kind of irrelevant because we have so many weekenders. But you're going to get a range. You're not going to, you're not going to get a Colebrook that's going to apply to a Kent, but you might get a Washington that is larger, be similar because of the schools, but it might be different in another way. The town clerk is not going to be that different from another town. There may not be, but there may be situations that might enhance. It's not that hard to get 4 similar towns with similar positions. Then you have to segregate them and just say, well, this is different because it's included with this, or we do a little bit different in our office because we do the maps and, in a bigger town that's engineering. These things are already out there. They're available. It's not nuclear medicine, for God's sake.
I think you're
I'm
right.
used to doing things on an equitable basis. What's been done there has not been done on an equitable basis, for the part-time people especially.
I think you're right, the info is out there, but in your explanation, I think you sort of correctly stated, maybe inadvertently, but correctly stated that there's so many different variables town to town, not just population, I get
The people
that.
who work in the departments
But-
would know what the variables are, could address them, present them to the selectmen, and give them something that's concise, and maybe that would be a good solid way of making them part of the process.
But you have to believe what we're telling you.
Yeah, that's
And you
a little
haven't
bit of a
in the
problem.
past. That's a problem.
Well, I've only been here a short term, but has it, I don't believe the
There's
Board of
nobody in
Selectmen
this
has
room
ever
that's
sat down with an
overpaid.
individual department and discussed goals and gotten data like that. Is that accurate?
I think we've had
That's
this.
not, I know that when I've been present and I've come in before the board, I've been able to say to you that my office either achieved, yes, whether there was an increase in land records, whether there was an increase on different things to do with the website, or I'm just.
No, you have done that. Here's
I
my
have,
question.
and I've shown you and proved to you either the growth or the change.
Okay,
I've
but were
given you
those
statements
goals,
of budgets, of adjustments to budgets or changes of hours, and I've then translated them to, did I reach a goal, did I not reach a goal? And I feel in my communication to the board year after year that I've helped supported what you're putting forward as, why aren't we doing that? And it can either be proven by going back to the use of the statutory requirements. My goals are also tied to statutory requirements. Do you get a call from the state saying DEP is not getting reports or whatever? So yes, actually, I'm gonna comfortably go out on the limb and say, I feel in my communication from my department, whether it's myself and or for my staff, I've put forward that information. Maybe not in a format that you've provided, but yes.
no, but that's,
And so
you may,
and so
you have done that, excuse me, you have done that while I've been here. What I have not seen is anyone agreeing that those goals are what we should be achieving. Those are your individual town clerk goals, correct? And those are your measuring sticks.
Okay.
But I have never seen it in a Board of Selectmen where we both agree that that's what you're, we could say, hold on a second, hold on one second. We could say that if that's your mission statement and we support you 100% and you hit those markers, we should be telling everybody in town. And therefore, that is the merits and justifications of what you're saying. You've achieved those goals, perfect.
But what you just stated, if you don't, may I, Darrell?
Sure.
What you just stated is sort of what I've been saying all along, is I don't feel qualified to tell her how to run her office as a town clerk, and I definitely don't feel qualified to tell Patty how to be an assessor with all the experience that she's had in the years she's been in it and the complicated office that is. I just don't.
That's because you're thinking, you're coming from the mindset of having to tell them something. That's not my goal. My goal is to ask them what their goals are and agree with those goals. If the goals of, pick a department, the road foreman, if the goal is to have X amount of roads paved in a year, and he says, I can do it, this is the budget, and we agree, no, that's not enough road.
But that's your 5-year capital plan.
It's not, no, that's something, that's different. 5-year capital plan is just the budgetary component of it,
Of your goals.
of a goal. But if you don't set a mutual goal between this department here and all the other departments, then we can't promulgate it. We can't say, we can't stand up in front of people and say, this is what's happened. And I'm not even talking about hard things, this is not hard. They're like four different things that we all agree that we're gonna do, and then based on that, whether they're achieved, and sometimes they're not, and there's a reason why. But if they're achieved, those are the measuring sticks in which you
But I'm gonna go
use.
back to Darlene since she's brought the topic up. She does that every year.
But have we
She comes and
agreed?
sits at this table, she does it very clearly,
Mhm.
how she's reduced her budget sometimes, how she's had to increase it once in a while,
Mhm.
how she's found a grant to get this. She sits and tells us all of that every year.
And I
So
don't
why
wanna
haven't you,
make
why
this-
haven't you given her a raise in
I'm
the
just
last?
using her as
But I don't want to be on record as making this a personalized statement. This is not me preaching.
No.
I
No,
want to
no, I'm
make
just-
sure,
and
I
I'm
don't
just
want
using you
anybody
as
in
an
the room
example
to
because you
feel
brought it up.
uncomfortable that I
Yeah.
am preaching for me. I'm just saying, as an example, I feel those efforts have been made. And I think what I'm hearing is, and Chris, I don't disagree with there has to be a measurement of evaluation. I don't disagree with that being what you feel you need to help provide you in an instrument or more information to make decisions. My fear is, though, we've now lost, here we go again, we've lost a half year of a fiscal budget. And to put this system in place, to me it sounds like I'm gonna have to possibly go a whole nother fiscal year, because you're gonna set my goals for the 19-20 year, which I'm not gonna be able to prove to you, obviously, until the end of the next year, for you to then give me the possible salary adjustment, if there be one, that then is supported by me achieving the goals. My frustration is that that's 2 years out that I'm hearing. I don't want to wait for my assistant's salary to be reviewed, to be analyzed, to be adjusted fairly and appropriately. That is my goal. I have continuously supported the board, and anytime you continue to make a decision, and here we go again. Here's another put off of time, and not to say it's not with relevant opinion and effort, but you're pushing it off again.
So if we did a 6-month review,
Okay.
because we're 8 months out before budget changes, so if we did a 6-month review, or a 6-month goal-setting period, would that help?
I got a reval going. Yeah, we got court cases. There's gonna be, I got a big project going. And it takes a year or so after a reval for everything, for the dust to settle. So that's going to.
But if everybody, I'm sorry, just step on that.
And the word goal may be the wrong, but I provide a process for government. There may be others more, like zoning may be more goal oriented. I'm not sure if that's the right term for it. But I mean, I can't say I have a goal because I want to increase the grant list like 14%, because that's not possible. Right. You know, my goal may be to get stuff online, or maybe do it once a month, or get a new another public. But as far as that's just an office function. I can't imagine what kind of a goal I would have.
I disagree with you. I think those simple goals that you just sort of off the top of your head said, I think.
But that's part of my job.
Well, it is, but if you said, but if you said in the next 6 months, Board of Selectmen, these are my goals, and whatever the 3 you just ripped off there. And we said, wow, after 6 months, those were all achieved, that's excellent. That's what I'm getting at. It doesn't have to be statutorial, it doesn't have to be that, but.
Yeah, I just look at it as far as doing my job and doing the best job I possibly can, because that's what we're supposed to do as public officials.
And
I don't think we have to be told that.
Could you look at my office and say it's the Board of Finance that sets the goal? It's 99% collection rate is the goal of the office. Are you gonna accept that as a goal? I can say we've surpassed that goal for the last 3 years.
If that is the only goal that you have, and that's the only goal, and that's the only goal we get to measure by, then I guess that's all we have. But I would think in all departments, there are small short-term goals and long-term goals. I mean, is there, so for instance, as an example, the long-term goal, 99.9%, and you do it by getting the collection up front, you know, you have escrowed payments, you know, do you increase that, or is there a way you can make it more efficient? And again,
I can tell you for the last 3 years, we have increased our goal. We have a goal in the office, we are working on it, we are succeeding.
So what frustrates me, and disappoints me to a degree.
The Board of Finance reports this in the annual report.
Yeah, but come on. Nobody reads that the way we, as a measuring stick for you. As a measuring stick for somebody's increase in salary, nobody reads that report.
But that's what we do for a living, that's the name of the job.
Chris, I saved the town around $70,000 for the reval. That was a goal. We had worked on that a couple of years before, got things in place, with a lot of planning. We went out to bid, we did it, we brought in extra revenue for a couple of years to help offset the costs. It was done, it was over. the measuring stick never brought in, number one, we accomplished something, people were more proficient, and we have something in place, so going forward, we'll never incur that large cost again. But that was my own personal goal for the process and for the town. I don't make a big deal about it, we just did it. And I was very fortunate to work with people who could help me accomplish that, for the people who pay the bills. So I'm a little like, that's our responsibility as public officials to make sure we run the best possible functioning office that we can. For someone to say, sort of come up with, the goal thing is bothering me a lot, because I set goals and I achieve them.
So would it be
And I
helpful?
achieve them for the right,
So let me just ask, would it be helpful?
I believe in the process, and the process works when it's applied properly. And I've always felt that a Board of Selectmen is here to help the people who run the departments achieve the goals that are put in place for those departments by the department heads or those responsible.
So,
It sounds to me like you love Chris's idea.
But it's done through the capital plan.
no, I think the problem is, the challenge is that, and I'll be candid, I don't think this board here understands the goals of each department.
Well, that's why.
Nor, hold on,
I can't,
hold on.
the door's open.
Hold on, and I think what's been done historically is those goals that you've had internally have been expressed, as Darlene's pointed out, year in and year out as a means of, okay, now it's budget time. I think that that's the wrong approach. I think the approach is, the beginning of the year, what are the goals? And then when it comes time to sit with the department and figure out, have you achieved those goals? What did we not provide to you to help you with those? What tools, what monies, what assistance, and to me, once there's a mutual understanding, then we have a better measuring stick.
Let me throw out another suggestion. I think there may be some structural changes we can make to meet more regularly in setting goals. In my view, certain departments are more statutorily constrained, and it's and you can easily measure compliance with the statute, and that's it. And other departments can do a little more, save money. I guess Patty went out of her way to find ways to save some extra money in the reval. So there are some measuring sticks there, and maybe we can engage more. But that's kind of a going forward process to hopefully make the town run better into the future. We're dealing with a few more short-term items. On more of a longer-term basis, I want to throw out another idea. This may require a change to the town charter.
We don't have a charter.
We're not a chartered town.
Okay, whatever the structure of the town, may sort of require a town meeting. Maybe the structure of the senior management, which I guess is us, maybe this needs to change. Maybe the selectmen should function as we are, but maybe there should be a town manager who's a paid executive, who basically does probably 50 to 70% of what Bruce does day in and day out, but more interactive as like an executive manager of the employees in town, and run it as an executive office rather than the selectmen that meet once a month. And the selectmen would meet to make major policy decisions, set long-term directional goals, set direction for management protocol. It seems like part of the day-to-day functions of the town fall so heavily on Bruce that there's not really the ability to interact in a traditional management sense with town. I was hoping to get a little bit of that out of Lee. He didn't address that at all. I brought it up to him as a concept.
The town manager concept.
The town manager concept. And that's why, I had made an inquiry to CCM to try to get a feeling for other towns, and the information I got from them was essentially useless. but I was trying to get a sense of how do other towns do this? I haven't been involved in any other town
I can
management.
tell you, without getting into a big discussion about town managers, that has been a topic that has been discussed here in Kent. I'm gonna say
2001.
2001, when George Jacobson was a candidate along with, I believe, Karen Casey, and they were proponents of the town manager form of government. Basically, running as they were, but with the understanding that ultimately they would turn the town over to the town manager form of government. So a lot of research was done. I did a lot of it. I have it in my office. I'd be happy to give it to you. At the time, the smallest town with a town manager was Hebron, population approximately 9,000 at the time. Nothing close to the size of this town had that.
And what was the outcome?
The outcome was that they lost the election. And that was-
People
And
didn't
here I
support,
am.
people didn't support the concept.
People did not support the concept. People, a number of people, I think, took the belief in casting their votes that if we vote for them, that we're ultimately gonna have a town manager, and we don't need that. I think.
What was the reason for not wanting a town manager?
Too small.
Too small an
expensive.
operation and costly.
Too expensive.
Town managers generally over 100,000.
But I think
I'll share with you what I have.
your point, I think, if I may, is if you had somebody that was, managing departments? I don't understand because I think that is less necessary in a town of this size, but it's more about understanding what's going on and encouraging and helping, and also at some point saying, no, that's too much, or that's too little. I think it's using the expertise of the department to relay the information, but it's gotta be where everybody understands what the rules are and what the end game is.
Well,
In just hearing, like, and I may be hearing it wrong, but even in just hearing the words, like, having a decision or say into what's too much and what's too little, I can't say how many departments' budgets, but I'm gonna safely say most budgets are so defined by a specific number to a specific expense. So when you talk about having decision-making into what is too much and what is too little, and I'll again make it more specific, I have a contract for my records maintenance. That's the only thing as far as one of my biggest operating expenses. That's not anything that you have authority over to say that's too much or too little. And I think if you look at most departments, I don't know where you're finding that you're gonna have so much of an input to telling department heads, gosh, your budget is so high that maybe you need to change this or do this or implement this.
I don't think budgets are high at all. In fact, I think
But then-
you all have, hold on, I think all of you have done extremely well job. The whole thing about this is about whether you guys deserve raises.
What is too
That's
much or
what-
too little though, when you use that statement? When you said, you just said, we could then make suggestions of what is too
What
much
happens is,
or
as an
too little.
example, you come in and say, I need another person to help me.
Right,
We say, okay, well, it looks like that's rational, but maybe we can't afford it.
okay.
Maybe we can. But if your ultimate goal is to take another assistant, let's just say you have another 2 assistants, and that's going to get you to a point where we believe it's going to be more cost effective if you, to run your department, and ultimately the benefit of the town, then we decide that.
Okay, so if I'm hearing correctly, it's more specific to the actual salary line that you're talking about too much, too little, not anything that possibly could be outside of that.
No, what I'm talking about is, again, getting means of measuring whether a department has done its job overall, and that was defined in the beginning, and then done in the end, at which point then you say, that was a job well done.
Do we not do that with the budget? When we come to you with a budget and we say, like, I'll use Rick for an example, he has X amount of money in asphalt. He uses it by the end of the year. He met that goal. He knew at the beginning of the year how much money to put in that line based upon how many roads he was gonna do. he met his goal.
And if you ran out of money, you stopped paving.
Then he,
Or
either
he
because,
has
or
to-
he could say, I stopped paving because the price change, I mean, there's variables, get it. But that's his goal, as we all, Darlene sets a goal if she, I don't know what lines you do, I don't know, whatever. Leslie with her, I'm sorry, I can't think off the top of your head. Leslie, yeah, but Leslie, for her,
I don't know where you're going, after school?
yeah, you know, she sets a goal, she sets how much money she's gonna take in for after school. She sets the budget, she's met her goal. I mean, so we do that, and when we come to you with the budget, we're saying, this is what we anticipate, this is our goal, to spend this much money on X, Y, and Z throughout our budget, which is, as Darlene said, very specific. We're proving, we have been giving you that measure. No disrespect, wait a minute, but no disrespect. It's not our fault that you, and I don't mean you, I mean the Board of Selectmen in history has not taken the time to say, oh, that's what you spend the money on. We've done it all along. You need to accept the responsibility for and I don't mean disrespect, I'm sorry, and I know I'm on record, on camera, but I think maybe what you're saying is, we don't need to do it, you need to do it, and you need to get more involved.
That's exactly what I got out of this.
But it's
So-
there, I mean, so when, at year end, those transfers are made, and,
Right.
and that information is provided to you, instead of it just being looked upon as just a number, where is the evaluation to, why did this happen? When did it happen? Is it going to occur again? And if it's gonna occur again, it's up to you to make sure, and year after year, we've watched this happen, where monies have been transferred from line to line, and then the next year, there's no either increase to that line, or decrease to that line, or there's no questioning to that line. That goes back to, it's in your authority to help define, commit, reevaluate, make sure our goals, which is budgetary, are assured. But you have that information. Every week you sign checks. Every week you're provided reports. You are given the most information, besides the treasurer who has it tangible because that's her world. You're given the most information to understand what our departments are doing. It shows you seasonally, and again, I'll say Leslie, it shows you Park and Rec seasonally. What is she involved with? You know, what programs are going on? Again, in the foreman, what is he handling seasonally versus weekly versus monthly? In all our departments, I feel that you're provided the most information to really get to know us. You know, if one of my bills all of a sudden spikes, why are you not coming and asking me, Darlene, what did you do? Did you change your contract? Did you mess up and send too many documents? Or, you know,
So do you think that that would be a proper way to work board to department?
I think it's, in my opinion,
Yeah.
I think that you're not seeing how much, I don't think you're recognizing how much information you already have at your fingertips to keep you aware.
But that wasn't the question. The question was, you said, if Darlene and I messed up,
Yeah.
I spent too much on X. Do you believe it is the role of this board to come to you and say, Darlene, you messed up?
Yes, absolutely.
As opposed to, which I don't subscribe to that. I do not subscribe to going into the departments and saying, you know, you spent too much here or spent too little here. What I subscribe to is at the period of time in which we sit down to do budgets, that you say, for 3 years in a row, the goal has been to reduce my line on make it up copying. And that's a net savings to the town, and that was one of the goals. If you show that you've done that because you put everything online and you've saved the town money, if you will, and it's not always about money, it's about what you're doing is an effective process. So sometimes it's spending more money.
Right.
But I think if we had that written down on a form that we said, okay, this was one goal, this was two, it's a measuring stick for this board to say, those 4 or 3 goals were set and they were accomplished. And then we could look at it and say, well, we didn't do a good enough job at watching the bills on this, and therefore there was a spike in something, and we can all take blame for that, if you will. But then we readjust the goals going forward next year. But without something that says what, and I understand that there are statutory requirements, I understand that there are nuances, but I truly believe that if during budget time, or before budget time, we sat down and understood what your goal was, and what our role was in that, and what your role was in that, it would be a much easier and more helpful process. I don't think I'd want to get into the bills.
Perhaps if you as a board set the tone and set goals for yourselves, we'd sort of have an idea of the way you're going.
Can you give me an example?
The way you handled the building inspector. As a goal, that should never happen again.
In what manner?
You waited until the guy was, we didn't have a building inspector for how many days? You should have seen this coming, you should have looked at the contract, you should, as a board of selectmen, you tell me what you should have done.
Well, in that specific example, I would agree with you 100%.
So
I think there was a
make
failure
that
of this board.
Make that a goal. I mean,
Well, no doubt.
If there was a failure, there was
Bruce,
probably.
I'm just
It's
saying
not-
as a goal.
Let me just
I-
finish. Oh, actually, fine,
No, I agree with Debbie to the
Yeah.
degree that, but this is how I see it. Had this board at the beginning of the year sat down specifically with departments, specifically with that department, the question would have been asked, what is your succession plan?
But you knew the contract was up.
We know the contract's up. What is your succession plan? Whatever that may be, and if he's like, I don't know, okay, how do we prepare for that next system? I
I'm
totally
just throwing
agree,
it
I
back on
totally
you,
agree with you,
yeah.
totally agree with you.
And I
But
was
that's
gonna
an
say-
example.
I was gonna say, if you wanna place blame, I guess I'm the one that should
There's
have
no
known
reason.
the
That was
contract
not
was
my
up.
point.
I didn't. I knew that Bill was leaving when he handed me a letter and said he was leaving.
But to her point, it's not just you, this board should have known that his term was expiring and we could have been better prepared. Fair. But I think that's really what we're talking about. If we can sit down department to department, that's where you learn those things. That's where you find those little issues.
But to go back to what Darlene was saying before, I don't subscribe to your line of goal setting, we'll call it. I believe, I've been here now going on 9 years, it'll be 10 by the end of this term, and I feel very, very confident in the people that are in the various departments as department heads and the people that work with and under them that are doing their job. And as Darlene points out, there's multiple ways to monitor that. And she uses the example of checks and the report, not so much the checks, but the reports that Barbara gives us about monthly. She gives to the Board of Finance, she gives to us as to budget versus actual and how the budget stands. It's there. It's there for any kind of evaluation that we might want to do. You know, it's pretty easy to see. People ask me all the time in the winter, oh gee, you must be overspending that salt and sand budget. It's very easy to see because you get a report every month. Okay?
It strikes me as I'm sitting here, I think that the goals are generally more of a private sector approach to a situation. If you're in a business, you would set goals, and then you have your departments get together, but they aren't all formally and legally different. I mean, we're all pretty much going down the same road in a small town, and we're trying to save money, use taxes that they and all of that. But a goal for a business is different than a goal for government. I think there's different things, and especially with the budgetary constraints and those cycles, because.
Well, Patty, I disagree with that, partly because there are statutory minimums, so let's agree that you have to minimally comply with statute, or the town and the individuals are in trouble. But in your case, you already gave an example where you set a goal to save the town more money that you didn't need to do. You could have still complied with the law and not saved us that money.
Yeah, but I'm saying from the department head, yes, that's my responsibility,
right.
but it's, and I plan that through the budgetary process.
But I mean, I don't see why you don't
And
think
so
that's a
you're
good
well,
thing
you're well aware of the goals and through the budget process, because that, it would be set in over the 5-year. I'm hung up on the 5-year capital plan. To me, that's your goal setting mechanism. That's.
See, I disagree.
I
The capital is
Not
capital.
everybody's in there.
Capital has nothing to do with other things other than capital. Long-term planning and projects.
That's where I was able to meet.
But that, no, only one goal you were able to set there, which is great, which you pointed out. I find what's interesting is nobody's saying, you know what, tomorrow, Board of Selectmen, we'll write down 3 goals for you, what our department wants to achieve, and I want you to measure me in the next 6 months on those 3 goals. Darlene's getting her pen out.
And it is done in other towns.
I don't really care what other towns do.
I know, I'm just
but
saying that it is there, and I'm
I
sure
find
that
that-
Lee has examples
I find that that's
of
great,
towns
but
that can do it,
How do you know that?
because I know they do it in Litchfield.
Oh.
Individuals have to set goals, and then they're measured on those goals. Every year they're evaluated.
I have no problem about setting goals.
Yeah.
That's
But
not the issue.
as I've expressed throughout this process, that every year they're evaluated. By whom? As I've said many
Department
times,
heads are evaluated by the first selectman.
I do not feel even remotely qualified to evaluate.
But could you evaluate if a department head set the goals, and then they told you whether or not they met those goals?
Hey, it's an
'Cause that's what
evaluation of
happens.
meeting the goals.
that's all it is.
And
It's way easier than just doing 3%.
Yeah, well, if
I'm gonna ask the devil's
If-
advocate question.
Yeah.
If department head A had 3 goals and
What if we
I
meet
met
our
with
goals?
him or
What if
her
we
and they
do?
said they
Yeah.
met their goals,
But that's it for our
and I asked them, okay, how did you meet it? Well, if the goals were specific enough, yeah, I guess,
That's what other towns do.
but I'm sure
Makes sense.
that's not gonna go into any of these offices and tell Patty or
But
Darlene or
that
Joyce.
doesn't make sense. You can't know everything. They know.
I know.
That's
I-
why
that's
they
what I'm
need to
saying.
set their
I
own
don't.
goals.
That's
It's
why
not even
they're
productive.
That's why they need to set their own goals, because then they know whether, and then they're gonna be able to evaluate whether or not they met them.
Again, I don't think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's right, I just wanna play the other side of the coin. So what if we meet a goal, here's an example. So last year at the after-school program, we were lucky to get 9 or 10 children in a day. For some unknown reason, because the enrollment has dropped at Kent Center since last year, I had 19 youngsters at after-school program last Friday. And it's like, I can't account for that,
Right.
except now I need to staff more. So if I base a goal for next year for after-school program attendance to be the same as this year, I could fall very short because these numbers are just, there's no rhyme or reason. So if we set that kind of goal and we
Well, the
don't
goal has
meet
to be,
it.
reflect things you can control.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't
Okay,
control.
because like my office is not statutorily driven, so there might be some things that I try to set that. So if I come up short in 3 things, sorry,
Well,
Leslie, you're getting
I would
nothing.
go, you're, and again, everyone's gonna have specific nuances, but
Right.
in your situation, you actually have a board to answer to.
Yes, I do.
So my reaction would be, your job is to huddle with your board and say, what are our goals? And what are your goals for me? And then come to us and say, these are our goals. And to Bruce's point, we're not gonna challenge Park and Rec if that's their, but we are gonna challenge them if in the middle of the year, they switch your responsibilities because that was not part of what they were thinking, and then all of a sudden, we're left with a hole in the budget, unacceptable. That's what I'm talking about, so that we could measure that very clearly, and there wouldn't be this, oh, all of a sudden we've decided, Leslie, you're gonna do this instead of what was budgeted. I think that would be very helpful for us, and it would be a great way to be able to measure that we are making successes. We are doing the things that I know we're doing, it's just, you know.
Okay, so each department sets goals, some more difficult to achieve than others. You're going to review that department head on those goals. So somebody, if they've achieved, they've all picked 3, they all achieved 3, but somebody's goals are much more difficult to achieve. How do you then determine what they're going to get in compensation for that? I mean, I'm assuming, because you said yourself, the point is so that you can evaluate them.
Mhm. Well, maybe there's no compensation.
I'm just
Again,
asking the
this is
question.
all supposition.
Right.
But if some of the goals, if one goal is of the 3 goals, is slightly missed, or there are reasons and rationales, then we as the board can say, well, that we understand. All of a sudden, there was a spike in kids, unpredictable. It's not that you didn't achieve your goal, you just had an unpredictability, and we can weigh it that way.
So you only get 2% of the 3% that you would have gotten?
I
mean, I'm just, you know.
Honestly, I don't have.
And I know it's a long process to get to, but it's food for thought.
No, you bring up a good point, and I don't think I or any of us here have an understanding as how that translates.
Okay.
But I think we have to start with the base that we have in terms of pay, and then understand that there's a certain pay rate out there, and that hopefully we can look at again to see if it measures, however you do that, and then, and move it from there.
My goal coming here tonight was one thing, and that was to address the underpayment of the part-time officials that are not department heads in this building. And I sincerely hope that you take and do a somehow come up with the funding to pay them appropriately as soon as possible. Because it's not right, because they are going backwards big time, and we're not talking $400 or $500, we're talking thousands upon thousands of dollars over a period of a couple of years, and it's not right, it's not fair.
And that is my ultimate goal of being here this evening. That was my ultimate goal when I
Well, and that was
started out.
really the reason, that's what prompted this report in this project in the
Right.
first place.
And again, I believe that that's what we were made to believe that was going to be addressed within this fiscal year's budget, because that's why it got put off as a decision to be made as part of actually adjusting the numbers, was to wait for this report, but that there would be opportunity for that to be analyzed, reviewed, and agreed upon within this fiscal year. I don't feel that my assistant should have to wait a whole nother budget season for an hourly rate increase that has now been supported by her department head, it has been supported by COG's salary, it has been now supported by an outside firm that is reaffirming the information, saying that it is a justified salary request. And I don't know how much more we can provide you. Again, as a department head, I've provided you an evaluation of this individual. Separate from an evaluation, I've now provided you, and this document helps support that, actual affirmation that that salary increase not only should be approved, but should be approved for a statement that's been made in this document. When is it that I can ask for action to be taken? And
This is
I
the
know
document that was worthless and a waste of time.
I took my hand down because when I didn't want to be put into the statement of yes or no. I have a lot of concern with the document, but anything that prompts discussion and keeps things alive, I have value in. If this keeps alive that my assistant is qualified and deserving of an hourly rate increase, that the money is sitting in my budget, I will continue to support this document. And I will sit here at every Board of Selectmen meeting asking again and again. I believed in the Board of Selectmen when you went outside and asked for this review to be done, with belief that it was going to be an action taken in this fiscal year.
And I would like to add to that, in my situation, my budget was cut significantly after I'd already cut it to reflect the raise, to make it equitable within my department. And this is in a revaluation year, one of the busiest cycles we have. The market has picked up, the building has picked up, it was stretched to the max, and it was just inexcusable. It's not right.
And if necessary, then I'm publicly requesting an executive session for this to be discussed more so directly about my assistant than my assistant's request, my request for my assistant. I know that can't be done now, but if that's what's needed, I really, really hope the board can look at this as action needed to be taken. And I will go along with the next step about, I'll be supportive of the team, and I'll go along with making goals, I'll go along with providing you results of goals, and I will go ahead and support this concept. But not until the one question that's on the table is a decision to be made about the increased request.
That's a priority goal.
And there's two department heads here who also forewent salary increases last budget season, that also thought that this budget season they were going to be reconsidered because there was another request on the table that got denied. So they too, who aren't here, and I hope I'm not speaking incorrectly for them, but I'm assuming they're going to be disappointed if they have to wait a whole nother year as well.
And that's,
I mean-
you're not speaking out of turn, because if you look back at your own minutes, that is in the minutes, that's
I
exactly
think
how
also in the
that
minutes,
was handled.
if I recall, there's a challenge for this board to make those budgetary changes in the middle of the budget season. Was it not? Was that not discussed?
I don't think anybody's asking you to do it out of budgetary season. I think you were gonna have this report, you were gonna make the decision so that in the next budget cycle, they would be getting that money, right?
No.
That's not what Darlene said.
No,
Now you're talking.
absolutely.
I think it was the case in the departments you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay,
But
okay.
specifically, the two
Okay.
assistants,
Okay.
correct me if I'm wrong, the
Right.
two assistant requests were really the one where the request was made to see if we could do it during the budgetary cycle. That document was going to sort of be the catalyst, if you will. I think at the time, we did express some concern as if we could do that actually there, but that was not determined, I don't believe. We did not make a decision on that.
No, I could be wrong, I don't remember, though, agreeing that it would happen during this fiscal year.
I think we,
If that's,
I don't think we
if
agreed,
that's
but I
somewhere
think
in
that
some
was,
minutes where I'm wrong, then.
that was the
first one
request.
was minute, but I just don't remember it.
I do remember, it was a request, we didn't promise we could do it.
You never, no, oh no, there was definitely no promise, but as anything, there's also indication of action.
Mhm.
Your indication, you're implying, your words were to department heads, implying, you know what, guys? We don't have the tools, let's go get them. And you implied that that's the reason that it was necessary for this discussion to happen sooner than later, so that we could respond to our assistants. That, I feel very comfortable in saying, yes, there was no vote, there was no agreed upon that action would be taken, but it was definite that I feel comfortable, I was left with that impression. And I was comfortable with thinking that, guess what? By year end, I'd be able to provide that information and decision to my assistant. And that's my responsibility to follow up on it.
Well, I will take it further, I think it's all of our responsibility for each of the department requests, and the question is, at least, I think if we can parse out the assistant issue and then tackle that first, that
That
would
should
be,
probably be number one.
that would be a good
As I
thing.
said 3 or 4 times, that's. what
Whether the
prompted
decision
this.
is whatever it is, but at least that we can deal with it.
I might suggest that if that's what we're, not now,
I agree.
obviously we can't now, we might want to set up a special meeting in the not too distant future, at which we would include some executive session to do such with any department head and their assistant, if they so choose to include them, separately, department by department.
I think that's what we should do. And in executive session, where we can discuss some of the details confidentially. So I think we should do that.
With that said, I would like you or someone to double check this data to make sure that we're dealing with good, real data.
First,
If it is to the point that they're under-reporting or over-reporting, whatever it comes out, because there clearly, as pointed out, are discrepancies.
well, the one Debbie pointed out is definite, I did the math and she's right. But,
So
if that's indicative, there may be others.
So I think it would be helpful if we had some understanding from good numbers. I would recommend that we do it on towns that are very similar to Kent. And then with those numbers, and then the departments, when they come to us talking to them, to make sure that we get that number right. Because if you remember, there's discrepancies in the assistants, and what we try to do is maybe equalize it.
That's what we tried to do last year, and that didn't go well.
Well, it posed a challenge.
I think a part of the clarification from the document is that we may be in a position to have the department heads help better define a clerk versus an assistant. Because I think that is a difference in job function that should be reflected in pay rate.
And that's specified.
Can I ask, has Lee's firm been paid in total for this report?
I'm not sure in total yet, but close.
Because it would seem reasonable to go back to him and say, we've had concerns raised about the discrepancies.
Oh, he's prepared to do that, whether he's been paid in full or not.
And then couldn't he just specify which towns were used in the calculation?
I'm sure he could. Not for every single one, but for.
But I mean, for the chart.
I think what Lynn's asking, and I agree with her, is can you go back to Lee specifically and say, we want you to use these 3 towns, or 2 towns, whatever you feel are the towns that are comparable, and get us a real number.
Well, I think for the purposes of what we're talking about specifically now in executive session, I would defer to the town clerk, for example, and to the assessor and say, give me the 5 towns in our COG, for example, that you think are.
So let me tell you what's gonna happen. The taxpayer on the street's gonna say, the Board of Selectmen just listened to those people, tell them what they wanted to do, and they gave them the numbers. That's not fair to them, it's not fair to us, and it's not fair to the taxpayer. What we need is our own 2 or 3 towns, Bruce, it's not that hard, just go and find 2 or 3 towns where the assistant rate is. We can find that, we can bring it may be the same dang number, I don't know, but at least we've done the process. And once we've done the process, we can come out and say, this is what we're.
Well, that's easy to do.
Then let's bring it to the table.
Patty, I thought, made it pretty clear earlier in the evening that there are many variables town to town.
Absolutely.
You can't always go by population. And I did a fairly comprehensive salary review 2-3 years ago and used basically population. I threw out Winstead and Torrington. Barbara said I shouldn't include Kent in it as well, so I threw out Kent and I did the other 17 towns or whatever. But you made it pretty clear, in your opinion, Patty, that that's not.
You have to do it with views of comparison,
And
that apply to the position.
And that's why I say that I would be in favor of asking the department heads for what town, not to do the work, but what towns do they think should be
You
included?
can go online and get the copies of the budgets, it's very simple.
Well,
it's not that hard.
Is that what the determinant would be, in your case, would it be size
Well,
of?
it would be, a lot would have to do with square mileage, housing stock,
See,
size of grant,
see,
absolutely, yeah, no, I know. I've done probably 50 of these.
Yeah, I mean, so I did a comparison of your salary and your assistant's
For
salary.
that department.
Well, I mean, we're only focusing on the assistants at this point.
Right, that's
So
what
all
I'm
I'm
saying.
saying is if we have our own data, and it's gonna be very simple,
Well, the assistants
and then
for
they
my
can bring their-
department would be different than one for others.
and
I think that's been.
that's
cleared
great. And if that's how the line of discussion goes,
up. That's been cleared up.
then that's great, then we come to a consensus, and that's all we're looking for. I just don't want it perceived that these departments are the ones telling us what the rate should be.
I'm not saying that.
That's all I'm concerned
simply
with,
saying-
and I don't think it's fair to the
Responsible public
departments.
officials, we're
No,
not
I'm
going
not
to,
saying that, I'm
we're not
simply
going to give
saying
information that's not correct.
that I think it would be wise to ask Darlene and to ask Patty, since they're the 2 departments in question here with these assistants, give me the 5 towns in the 21 town COG that you think would be the best ones, the best 5 to use to compare the salaries of your assistant to.
And what do you do with that data?
I don't want data, I just want 5 town names, give me.
For what reason? What do you want them
Then
for?
I'll go to the salary survey and I can get the salaries of those assistants.
So again, it's driven by the departments. What I'm suggesting is they do that and we do this. It is a fence.
What do you mean this, we do this, what are you talking about?
You go and find the 3, 5, 7, 22 towns that you think are comparable and come to us and say, these are the assistant rates that you think are the best to compare to. We will match cards and see if there's a consensus, because quite honestly, again, it shouldn't be just the ball in their court. It should be coming from us as well, I believe. Does that make sense? Am I, it's like saying,
I think, I'm gonna pick 5 or 6 towns, and Patty's just made it pretty clear that there's a whole bunch of variables in the assessor world that simply aren't in a COG salary survey. And it would be better for me to say, Patty, could you give me the 5 towns that you think are the most comparable to Kent in terms of a fair comparison of salaries? That's all. Don't give me the numbers, just give me the names of 5 towns. Darlene, could you do the same thing? I'm sure they could very quickly. I mean, if you don't wanna do that and you want me to just pick 5, I will, but then, you know, it's likely to be, an exercise in futility. I don't know, what either of you think about that, or?
It seems to me with the range of numbers we're talking about, it's probably not gonna make a huge difference. It probably wouldn't hurt to see what the different departments suggest are matching towns. I would suspect that Patty's town selection would have more input into specific, town specifics
Right.
than like the town clerk, for example.
Yeah.
I don't see how that could be different. Why can't you just take a town that's a population, forget the function of it? I mean, if it doesn't have a park and rec department, well, then you don't choose it.
Well, that's what I did in the salary survey that I did. And,
Well, I mean, isn't that an example why, if a town doesn't have a park and rec, then we don't need to
No,
use
they
that
can use
town
it.
for
So,
comparison.
for example, in many of the towns in trying to do the survey for the financial office, whether it's called treasurer or financial officer or whatever, it's done in like 5 different ways in the 21 towns. And so some towns I just didn't use, just couldn't compare, didn't use them. So I might have only used 13 towns in that. Some of them don't have a full-time park and rec director. Some of them don't have social services. That was a hard one to do. They all have a town clerk, they all have an assessor.
Are you doing union and non-union?
We're only talking about assistants at this point.
And sure, we're doing assistance.
Assistants, so let's just keep it to that.
Isn't
Okay.
that what Lee's chart was supposed to do, or am I missing?
All I asked is that this chart be looked at, because I haven't done any of that data, so we're just taking this data based on what's
Why
provided.
can't we ask him
Well, the first thing I'm
which
gonna ask
towns were
Lee
included?
tomorrow morning is, what towns did you use for the sake of comparison of assistance
Mhm.
for this study?
Which he provided,
He
but
only
yeah.
used Kent.
What?
He only used Kent, he explained that in the study
What do
already.
you mean only use 10?
And he took the 2250 that the assistant is making in the tax collector's office, and what one person is making in the assessor's office, and that's where the 2250 came from.
Yeah.
It's in the report.
Oh, that the two should be making the same salary.
Yeah, it's in the report, he didn't go to any other towns. That was an internal study.
Well, and then the range just happens to be conveniently supporting that dollar. And I mean it in that it supports that dollar rate on the
Well,
study.
it might be a little low for the assessors.
I don't know whether it's high or low, and I'm
But
not
that's
making judgment.
where it came from, Chris. It wasn't, it only came from Kent.
In the case of that position, yes. So I think we can accomplish quite a bit if we schedule these, I guess it'll be just 2 executive sessions. And sit down with the department heads and assistants if they so desire.
When do you want to do that?
Pretty open. Next week. Just
I'm pretty unopen, but I could do Monday, the 22nd.
So can I.
Okay.
I cannot.
Darlene, Patty, can you do that?
No,
That's
Monday's
next
not
Monday?
good for you.
Yeah,
At 22nd,
in the afternoon or evening?
Whatever works for you.
In the evening.
Afternoon.
Don't want to make you make a special
Yeah,
trip.
afternoon would work.
Do you have a time?
Can't.
Monday afternoon I could do that.
Do you have, like, what?
Tuesday I have pre-op appointment with the company, but Monday is fine. Later in the day. I'll be here.
2 o'clock?
We need to make sure
Right.
that, I mean, mean, for Patty's sake, as far as, because if the assistant's going to be also asked into executive session, that they're available too. And that they need to be present also, because it is actually discussing.
Can you check on that, Patty, and have an answer tomorrow?
They're here.
They're here.
Well,
One of us is here, I don't.
well, Jimmy's not.
Yeah, he's not. And I don't know that I'll be able to get him before Monday.
Oh,
Well, why don't we just pencil it in for 3 o'clock, if that works?
yeah, he's
Well,
here
you can't-
Monday anyway.
We're gonna have to do a separate time.
Yeah, so that,
Generally, he's.
let's do 3 o'clock Monday. Jen?
And if you
Jen,
can't make it, just
available
let us
Monday
know.
3?
I don't know if you're possible,
Oh, but you don't. Yeah.
Okay, now, so let's take care of one at a time since Darlene's not available on that day. So Joyce, you have that at 3 o'clock Monday, special meeting, executive session, assessor and assistants. Darlene, how about you, availability and
work to do all the time, so if you want to do 5:30 or whatever's best, or we can let them do it.
So if we could do 5 o'clock
On Monday?
That
on
same day?
Monday,
Oh, okay.
I'll be
Oh,
there.
on Monday, okay.
Okay, that works for both of you?
For me, it's fine, but, you know, it doesn't have to be Monday, it could be.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be Monday,
No.
Darlene, if that's not a good day for you.
Okay.
So we
So
agree to
you, Monday,
5:30?
5 o'clock? 5?
5 o'clock?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
So I'll warn it.
So,
3 o'clock with Patty, so.
Yeah.
3 o'clock and 5
I stepped
o'clock.
up for a minute, 3 to 5, okay.
Correct.
so should we make that tighter and just do 4 and 5, so that, does that work for you, Ben? And 4?
That would
I
probably,
don't know,
You don't know whether it works
I
for
don't know,
Jim?
Jim,
Yeah.
would that work?
Does that work for you, Jim?
Jim,
I mean,
it works for me,
yeah,
Jim
okay.
generally leaves at 4, but I
Yeah,
don't.
Jim generally leaves at 4.
He's
I'll try to get a hold of him. I know 3 would work.
Well, we can do that. We can do that.
Excuse me.
okay. So we can schedule, just so we can make decent use of the time, Joyce, how do we schedule it? We want to schedule a regular meeting at 3 o'clock, and we're going to go into executive session at 3 o'clock.
We need a special meeting.
Special meeting, at 3 o'clock, we're gonna, let's say it takes an hour. We're in executive session from 3 to 4, we come out of executive session, but we're not scheduled to meet with town clerk until 5 o'clock. Because it's a meeting that we could then continue to meet like this from between the two, correct?
If you have,
If
if you have an item to discuss,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
You know, continued discussion of management review or whatever, or maybe even some,
Okay.
you want it that way, and then we're not
Makes sense.
wasting time or going home and coming back.
Can I suggest that maybe you think about implementing the goals thing for July 1 for the next fiscal year? Seems how we're almost halfway in this fiscal year
By that, you mean having everybody have goals in place
for July
for
1.
July 1?
That would be looked at next.
What?
But then they wouldn't be able to be,
Judged.
I get it, but we're already in October, we're going into holiday time, we're going into budget making time,
We're also going into an election year next November.
whatever.
Well, I understand it. I don't think it's going to be very challenging for people to come up with 3 goals, 2 or 3 goals. I think if you can just hear, at least from my perspective, I need a measuring stick to even get a sense. I know you all do it well, and it's proven. Again, I don't think your budgets are anywhere out of whack. I think really what I'm struggling with, which has been the stick in my craw for a long time, is just giving an across-the-board increase, whatever that number is, I don't think is fair. So I would like to get, as soon as possible, some measuring stick.
So just, again, devil's advocate, we have them, I don't know, say by the end of December or whatever, we're coming to the board in January, February, that doesn't give very much time.
Well,
to measure.
it could be reflective. You could come with those 3 goals and say, I just wanna point out, as Darlene has, but although it's not been on, maybe it's been crystal clear to all of us, but not been written down so we can check it off.
Okay,
But maybe you come with those and say, these are the goals that I achieved last year, and these are the goals that I'm gonna achieve next year.
okay.
I think we're just talking about something that's gonna give us a little bit of something to hook ourselves into.
And are you gonna make that decision sooner rather than later? Because some of us who have commissions have to go back to them and have to be cognizant of those meetings and deadlines, so.
Well, I think even if we didn't go there, I think it would be probably very good for you to sit down with your board and say, hey, just a heads up, this is where the board of selectmen's going, and I think, you know, maybe you do it internally.
Yep.
Okay, I think we've kind of rounded through a first cycle of this pretty well.
Thanks, guys. I know this isn't easy, but thank you for all that input.
Thank you to those that stayed and thank you to those that came back.
Move adjourned.
Second.